they have sometimes it almost looks like sand by the thing on land. Is that? I just was curious if you ever heard of that.
No, I never heard of that, but it makes sense. You know, it starts to degenerate. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting.
The body degenerates. I just read about a really interesting substance. You ever buy those 5-hour energy drinks? Mm-hmm. And you look at the label? Look up all the different things on the label. It's fascinating. The last thing on the list is a specific chemical that helps your circulation in your brain. It helps Alzheimer's, actually. Yeah. And it's pretty cool. So, I mean, it's naturally found in foods, too. It's like the bitter taste of an uncooked or slightly raw, I think it was like a lemon or whatever. It's got that, it's a chemical it's zirconin, I believe it's called. Anyhow. Okay, so going back to this is your, what is this called again? Corpus callosum, which connects the left to the right side. That's a white matter. What is this?
Pineal gland.
You know this one? Lateral ventricle, which is, now what is a ventricle? A ventricle is a space that's going to have cerebral spinal fluid in it. So you have lateral ventricles, you have a third you have the third ventricle, and you have the fourth ventricle, and then what you're going to have is a passageway from the lateral ventricles into the third ventricle. So the third ventricle will be right around the thalamus region, and there would be a, what's it called? I just drew a blank. Coming straight down, you'll have a foramen, I forget the name, interventricular foramen, where the fluid comes down into the third ventricle. Then from the third ventricle it goes into the cerebral aqueduct coming down, which is great. When you have a brain, you actually take the probe and you put it in. You can see it kind of coming through, and it's bulging through. It's a space right here. It's a big space. So this is your cerebral aqueduct coming down right here. This would be a cerebral aqueduct in here. So this is the thalamus area, right? But the third ventricle is surrounding the thalamus. See that? So this is the lateral ventricle, third ventricle, and then the cerebral aqueduct comes down into the fourth ventricle would be in here. So you only see half of it. You can't see the whole thing. And then the central canal goes down the center of the spinal cord all the way down. And it's bringing the fluid down the spinal cord, and it comes back out around the spinal cord at L2, where it ends, and goes right back up. Our body will replace the cerebral spinal fluid every 4 hours. I told you about a patient of mine who had damage to it. Did I tell you that story? He had surgery, and they cut the meninges, and he was leaking CSF out of his wound all day, getting very bad headaches. It's drenching his bed. And they repaired it with surgical glue. And went in and just glued them back together. Pretty cool, huh? And that's another use for glue that we haven't used before, right? So this is the cerebellum. And you notice this little tree-like structure? That's called the arbor vitae of the cerebellum. It looks like a tree, right? That's the branching of the nerve fibers in there. So there's your pituitary gland. This is the infundibulum, or the stalk of the pituitary gland. This is the connection between the thalamus that helps to connect the thalamus to each side. And this is the 23. This is the pineal gland here. Cerebral aqueduct, fourth ventricle. Central canal is kind of coming down here. Lateral ventricle, third ventricle will be around the thalamus. Hypothalamus, thalamus. This is the, right here, this is the, oh my gosh, this is where the fluid is being produced. I just drew a blank, I said it before. Don't worry about it, we'll come back to that. No. I'll come back to it. So here's the cerebellum, okay? Now, you guys know your cranial nerves, right? So you got to know your cranial nerves for this test. And you can come down. It's numbered. Cranial nerve 1, Roman number 1, number 2.